Hello, everybody. Meteorologist Jacob Campbell here with your WeatherNow forecast. I know I haven't uploaded for the last 2 weeks. I had finals and then I had to move, and so that's been a whole fiasco in and of itself. But I should have more regular uploads here now that I am all settled in and we're good to go. So, without further ado, here is the Saturday forecast for precipitation. So we can see that actually a very significant chunk of the country is going to have some sort of rain or thunderstorms during the day on Saturday. This is Saturday, by the way. I forgot to put a thing that said Saturday. But, so this is, we have an area of high pressure up here in the Pacific Northwest, and so the Pacific Northwest is going to largely see some drier conditions this weekend, whereas with the California area, there's a low pressure system moving in off the coast that will bring some rain here into the day on Saturday and some part of the day on Sunday, maybe even some thunderstorms for this whole Southern California area. But the real big area to look at here is this area of heavy rain. So this area of heavy rain down here marks a really common track for a lot of the thunderstorms that we've seen so far this spring throughout the Houston, New Orleans, Birmingham, Jackson, Chattanooga, Atlanta area, Nashville. This area here has been getting absolutely bombarded with rain and thunderstorms and whatnot. And so flooding is a very, very high risk within that area. So if you live around there in the day on Saturday, you're going to get some torrential rain, some heavy rain, and so you just be on the lookout for flash flooding and whatnot. There's this area here in Colorado and northern New Mexico around the Denver, Grand Junction, Trinidad area where you're going to be looking at some mixed precipitation, and that's primarily because you're in the mountains in those areas. But nonetheless, some mixed precipitation in those areas. If you live in the Great Lakes area, Michigan, pretty dry with the exception of pretty much south of Detroit and Grand Rapids. Green Bay is going to be dry, but if you live on the western half of Wisconsin, you're going to get some rain. If you live in this far western part of the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, you're also going to be getting some rain. Just some moderate rainfall, really throughout the center of the country and then east. The only areas that are exempt from that are New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, southern parts of Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So if you live out here to the New England area, and if you live out here in the Pacific Northwest or in this little area of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, you're going to look for a dry weekend. However, everyone else is going to have a very wet weekend. Moving on to Sunday. So Sunday here, we do see it dry up a lot for these Great Plains states, and everything appears to be pushing both south and east. So we see the coastline of California has begun to dry out, while some of the more interior landlocked areas of California and Oregon are going to get some more rain. And then the coastal areas, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Montgomery, I can't read that, whatever. Those areas along the coast are going to dry up a bit. If you live over here in that same sort of area I mentioned before to the far west of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan into Wisconsin through Illinois, you're going to get some rain. Indiana, most of Michigan, most of Missouri and Arkansas, and then once again these Great Plains states are going to dry out. But then we have this area here once again of heavy rain, and we see that has pushed east, and so that heavy rain once again brings another risk for flooding for those areas. So if you live in essentially the areas stretching from Lake Charles all the way over to Virginia Beach and Savannah, Georgia, and Chattanooga and whatnot, be on the lookout for some flash flooding and some just regular flooding too, because with these high precipitation storms and the ground already being saturated, it is conducive to flooding. So then if you live in the New York, Pennsylvania area, that southern Vermont, southern New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Just going to get some light rain. You didn't have it before. The northern part of Maine dries up a bit, so that's good news for them. Ohio and parts of southeastern Michigan going to get some moderate rain. And then we have that area of mixed precip move further to the south, just north of Albuquerque. So if you live in this area, it could get a little chilly and you could see some snowflakes. So be on the lookout for that. Moving on to the severe storm risk. So this is for Saturday. That area that was outlined on the previous map, essentially stretching from Houston all the way over to North Carolina, are going to see some thunderstorms, but nothing too major. It's primarily a rain threat. And so there isn't a whole lot of cape and there isn't a whole lot of shear, but these storms are going to be produced along a stationary front. So you're going to be getting a lot of rain throughout the day. It's also got a very moist atmosphere because you got air channeling in from the Gulf. And so as a result of all of that, as well as surface daytime heating, it's going to trigger some thunderstorms that could turn into multi-cell and quasi-linear systems, which could bring some wind. But torrential rain seems to be the biggest threat at this point. So the SPC has labeled this as a marginal risk. Low probability of tornado watches and severe thunderstorm watches, and marginal risk for tornadoes, marginal risk for large hail, marginal risk for damaging winds, and a moderate risk for flooding. So once again, flooding is the primary concern here. Can't rule out some isolated hail, isolated tornadoes, or isolated damaging winds because those are possible as well. Moving on to Sunday, we do get this area of increased risk as you go toward the East Coast throughout parts of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And the primary threat here, once again, flooding is a major concern, but we also have a damaging wind threat, we have a large hail threat, and we have a tornado threat. So slight risk of large hail, slight risk of damaging winds, marginal risk of tornadoes, moderate risk of flooding. Basically what we're seeing here is there are some more moderate amounts of CAPE. I'm seeing some models run in the value of around 2,500 joules per kilogram. And so with those areas, you could see some supercell development, as well as around the 500 millibar level, there is a shortwave trough moving through the area, and what that does is it not only pools cold air aloft, it also causes air halfway through the atmosphere to move quicker, so it gives you some of that wind shear that you want to look for if you're ever predicting like supercell development. And so we've got 500 millibar wind speeds getting up to 40 to 50 knots, and so that does point in the direction of potential supercell development. Tornadoes don't appear to be very likely, just because there isn't a whole lot of CAPE and there isn't a whole lot of directional shear, which is how wind changes direction with height. And so if you don't have a lot of directional shear and you don't have large updraft capability, then you're probably not going to get at least any major tornadoes. Isolated tornadoes are likely, but nothing too widespread. The SPC has this area from North Carolina to Georgia and a slight risk, and the areas around stretching from West Virginia, all the way down to Louisiana and the New Orleans area. And so the severe thunderstorm watch probability is moderate, and then the tornado watch probability is low, just because they're not really expecting to see that much, going on in the way of tornadoes. But hail is a slightly elevated threat from yesterday, same with damaging winds. So be on the lookout for that. Moving on to high temperatures into the day on Saturday. So what we end up seeing is we see that there's very obviously a center of high pressure out here in the northwest, because this area is like unseasonably hot during the day on Saturday. We got areas of Washington and Oregon getting up into the 90s potentially, as well as areas down the coast of the entire West Coast essentially hovering around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as you move into the interior all the way to even Idaho, you're getting temperatures in the 70s and the 80s. So very, very warm for the West Coast into the day. The Great Plains, at least the upper Great Plains, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, it's going to be a little chilly with temperatures ranging from 55 to 65. Then if you live in the areas of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, southern Nebraska, and eastern Colorado, it's going to be in the 60s and 70s. So a little cooler for you guys as well, but a cold front has just pushed through your area, so you guys are going to cool down a bit more. But then we also see another cold/stationary front right here with all the cold air pooled behind it. And so that's going to bring a lot of the rain to this Great Lakes area. But you can see temperatures from about Indianapolis and really the Ohio River down here north. The temperatures are hovering around the 50s, whereas if you go south of it, they're hovering around the 60s and 70s. Then if you go into the New England area, cooler as well, going to be in the 50s and 60s depending on where you are. Florida is baking, but that's normal for them. Temperatures are going to hover around the 80s and the 90s. Moving on to Saturday lows. So the nighttime lows are actually fairly chilly for quite a bit of the country. 50s are the norm throughout a lot of this area until you get to the south of this system. If you live to the south of this system, it's going to be in the 60s and 70s as nighttime lows. If you live to the north of it, you can see temperatures in Michigan and Wisconsin down in the 30s. If you live in the Rocky Mountains, you'll see temperatures in the 20s. And then if you live anywhere else, for the most part, with the exception of Southern California and parts of Washington, you're going to see temperatures hovering around the 40s and 50s. Moving on to Sunday highs. So on Sunday, the United States sees one heck of a warm-up. So we've got areas around the Great Lakes and New England area that are going to cool down for some places and warm up for others. So, but it's primarily going to be in the 50s and 60s for a lot of this Great Lakes and New England area. And then as you move to the south, you see temperatures spiking down here in Texas and Florida. Florida seeing, and Georgia and South Carolina seeing temperatures in the 80s and 90s, whereas Texas and pretty much the rest of the country is going to see temperatures in the 70s and 80s. West Coast, once again, is going to be pretty warm, with areas of Washington getting up into the 80s and 90s, and then pretty much the coastal area and all the way over to Idaho, Utah, and Arizona, you guys are going to see temperatures hovering around the 80s, the 70s and 80s. Moving on to Sunday low temperatures. Once again, Sunday is Mother's Day, so don't forget to get your moms a present. Anyway, so we've got temperatures in the 50s throughout actually a very large chunk of the country again. If you live, once again, in this Gulf of Mexico area, pretty much southern Texas all the way up to Virginia, and then also Kentucky, Tennessee, and whatnot, you're going to have temperatures in the 60s as lows. Same with Southern California, and same with that weird little spot that keeps showing up in Washington. I really want to know what that is. I don't know why that keeps showing up. If you live along the coast on the west coast, it's going to be a little cooler in the 50s for you. If you live in the New England area, 30s to 40s is going to be your low temperature. And then if you live in eastern Montana, anywhere in Wyoming, or western Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota, it's going to be a little chilly for you guys with temperatures in the 30s. Same with Michigan. So I hope that you all enjoyed. If you would, I have a Twitter account, and so it's at WeatherNow7. And so if you want to take a look at that and follow me on Twitter, that would be fantastic. And I hope that you all enjoyed, and I hope that you all are having a fantastic Friday. So thank you all and have a good one.